Okay, so let's move on. And let's say now that we want to create another component called, let's say, admin component that returns admin here. And I want to also fetch the users and do something with the user data. So I want to go over the fetching process once again. Fetch, set the loading state, set the error state, and fetch this URL, or maybe another custom URL. So if I want to replicate this whole process, and I have to duplicate a lot of the code. So let's say that I also want to fetch the user's data within my admin component. What I will have to do is take all this code, copy it into my admin component, and then, of course, I will just copy also this part, just to continue on with the example. Let's say let's say I will display something that is different this time. So let's say email instead of name. So let's click after 2 seconds. So we have the users here. And of course, if I scroll down, sorry, I haven't used the. So let's start. You can see the 2 loading states, the 2 components, and the admin displays the emails, the users display the users. Okay, but the problem here is that, as you can see, I'm replicating, I'm duplicating a lot of code, right? Like use effects, abort controllers, loading, data, states. All this is making my admin and users component a little bit difficult to read and, of course, modify and maintain. So in order to, first of all, abstract away some of this complexity that is related to the fetching operations away from the component, so that my component becomes a little bit smaller, and also reuse this same fetching, let's say, process across 2 different or multi or many or more like components, I can create what is called a custom hook. So how a custom hook works is I'm going to grab the loading, the whole loading code from here, just the part that contains the use effect and the 3 states. So I'm going to take this part of the code, the part of the code that is responsible for fetching and setting these fetching related state variables. And I'm going to create a custom hook. So a custom hook is just a function, as I mentioned, that starts with the use prefix. So use, get, fetch, let's say, users. This is it. A function that is prefixed with use, just for keeping up with the naming conventions. And now I'm going to copy all this code, which, if you remember, contains 3 state variables: data, loading, error, a use effect that starts the loading and the fetching process, and returns back or sets either the data state variable or the error. And of course, it turns the loading state back to false. So I'm just copying and pasting these 3 states and the use effect. And now, instead of returning back a JSX, I'm going to return an object which contains the 3 state variables. An object with a property data, with the value set to data, a property named loading with a value set to loading. This is the same as writing, of course, data, loading, and error, right? And I'm exporting from this hook just an object with 3 state variables. Remember that these are not like plain variables. These are state variables. They were defined using useState. So the way I'm going to use this is I'm going to grab the name, and then I'm going to go to the admin component. I'm going to remove all the fetching code. So all this thing, I'm going to get rid of all this thing because I've just moved it to the hook. And I'm going to run the hook, which, if you remember, returns back an object with data, loading, and error properties. So I'm getting back this object. I'm destructuring the object so that I get 3 variables, data, loading, and error. And instantly, I have these 3 state variables contained within my admin component. So now the component works in exactly the same way. You can see I get exactly the same result, but all this fetching, loading, aborting, error, state setting thing has been abstracted away into a very, very nice reusable hook. And of course, I can reuse this across different components. I can have another component, I don't know, extras, whatever. Go here, and I will say return, I don't know. I'm just going to grab like the data, and I'm going to display the length. So I'm still using the same hook, which will be fetching and giving back to me a loading, error, and data state. I can use only the states the state variables that I want. In this case, I'm not going to use the loading or the error state variables. I'm just going to use the data, which of course is a little bit of mistake, because if an error happens, I will be seeing some, I don't know, some error here. But just for simplicity here, I'm going to say extras. And you can see the user count will become 10 after the loading operation completes. And of course, since I'm not using the loading and error variables, I can, let's say, remove them. It's up to me. So you can see how with custom hooks, we abstracted away a lot of like this fetching boilerplate, and we have a much cleaner interface to use across our components. You can see this whole thing. Now I have folded the sections, but you can see that we took away all these lines of code. So our component, as you can see, looks much cleaner right now. And the good thing is that I can reuse this hook within different components. And of course, I can parameterize the hook. For example, I can pass a URL. So instead of calling a static URL within my hook, I can go here and I can say, I want you to accept this URL from the argument, from the as an argument. So URL. So I'm just going to say use fetch users here, and then in the admin, here, and I can even fetch a different URL. So URL, let me see what I'm doing wrong. Use fetch users, math random. Sorry, wrong. Let me put this here in the hook, and this is the component. So the component will have the static URL, but then I can okay, URL. Let me refresh. Loading. Yeah, everything works. So I can add as many parameters as I want to my custom hook, and then I can reuse it across different components as a simple mechanism of abstracting away this whole loading fetching thing. And I can use the use fetch users hook in as many components as I want with by passing a custom, of course, URL. I can change the URL here in this extras component and get a different API. And you can see that it's much cleaner now. So you can use the use effect, sorry, the custom hooks with any kind of code that contains some state. Most of the time we create custom hooks and we use the use effect and the state to define some state variables, do something, and then reuse that custom hook across various components and get back some state variables that will eventually change. One example, I think we can find some examples in the documentation. They have some, they have this kind of like fetching, but so this is another custom hook implementation that creates a hook called use timeout that internally runs a set timeout function, and it's actually a running clock. So we abstract away all this code, all this functionality that starts a clock, a ticking clock, and then we get back a variable that will be updating some clock on our UI. So this is a use timeout that we will be using. Let's see. Use timeout. Okay, they're using it with a callback here. This is not what I expected. So let me write another custom hook. Just let's start this. So let's write another custom hook. Function use timer. So we want to start a ticking clock. So use effect only once when this is executed. And I'm going to create a timer. Something like a ticking clock. So in here, I want to start the set interval, which will, of course, run a function every, let's say, every second, or every 1000 milliseconds. And every 1 second, I will be setting the timer back to the previous value +1. So I'm using the callback form of the set, the state setter here. So this use effect will start a set interval function. We'll be calling this function every 1 second. And then every second, the timer state variable will be incrementing 1, 2, 3, 4. I also need a cleanup function because I want this timer to stop if my component that uses this hook gets unmounted. So I'm going to say return. This is the cleanup function without a name. I will get the ID from the interval, the set interval, and the set timeout always return an ID, a unique ID that identifies the timer or the clock. And I can use the clear interval or clear timeout to get rid, to abort, let's say, this timer. So this is a cleanup in case my component gets unmounted and I don't want this clock to be still ticking. Now, the only thing I want to export from this hook is the timer state variable. So after the use effect, I'm going to say return the timer. Let's see it in action, and then I will go through the code once again. So in my app, I'm going to say const timer equals use timer, and then I'm going to say timer. Let's see what's happening. So you can see I've used the use timer, which export a single state variable. I've used this, imported and used this variable in my app component, and I can display it and use it as a common state variable. So you can see here on line 143, sorry, this is just a one-liner. This is a very, very nice, I think this is the most beautiful pattern of React, because you can have these one-liners and you can abstract away all this timer complexity in a hook. So if I want to have a ticker or a counter or a clock, I can create a custom hook. I can import a single variable. I can use it in my component as a variable. It will update automatically. It will re-render my component automatically. And the code goes right here in the hook. As you can see, we have another state variable defined here in the hook. We have a use effect that gets called once this hook gets mounted. We make sure that we clean up and we stop the timer when or if this component that uses this hook gets unmounted. So we don't want a running clock running if the component gets unmounted. And then the only thing we need to export is this, to return, is this timer state variable. I think this is a really nice pattern, a very useful pattern that you should invest some time at some point to read more about and try a couple of simple examples.